BMW is currently in the process of rolling out EV versions of pretty much every car it makes, and this is next. It's the iX1. It's based on the X1 small SUV. Now, because it's based on the new generation X1, which has grown considerably in proportions over its predecessor, it's closer in terms of dimensions to what you might think of as a mid-size SUV. And that means this vehicle is actually quite practical. Furthermore, unlike the iX3 that sits above it in the range, this comes with a dual motor all-wheel drive system as standard, and that's just the beginning of a fairly long and enticing list of features that are available on this car. However, it's going to need to impress because although this is BMW's cheapest EV, it's quite expensive for an X1 in particular. Now, the first batch of iX1s are rolling out to their customers at the moment, and if you were one of the few to benefit from the introductory price that was available before January 2023, you would have paid about $83,000 or a little bit under as a list price for this vehicle. However, if you were to buy one today, well, you're going to pay an extra $2,000, and some of the desirable features which were previously standard have now been inserted into a costly additional package, such as the Harman Kardon stereo, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. So is this another win for BMW? Is this the sort of EV that you could see yourself driving every day? Well, today in our first drive, we're going to talk all about it.
Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by Now, obviously, this is the first generation iX1, but the X1 on which it's based has grown considerably over its predecessor. As I said, 53 millimeters in length and 22 millimeters in the wheelbase is quite a significant jump over a previous generation. Now, looking at the front of this car, we've of course got that closed-in grille compared to the combustion variant of this car because they don't really need to breathe as much. And we've got these matrix LED headlights which are fitted as standard. Now, you can get this car in two different trim levels. You can get an X-Line and you can get it in M Sport. Now, both cost exactly the same, so you don't have to worry about paying extra in that respect, and they both roll on 19-inch wheels in different styles. You can go for 20-inch wheels, which are an extra $2,000, but you may not want to do that, as we're going to talk a little bit about more later on. Those of you who are quite familiar with BMW design and products will be quick to pick up on the fact that this is a very different looking interior to what we've seen in BMWs of a few years ago. And of course, got to modernize, got to change things up, and the iX1 certainly has done that. The centerpiece of this new design is of course these two just over 10-inch in size curved displays. One, of course, for your multimedia, other, of course, acts as a digital instrument cluster. Now, in general, they're pretty bright and they're fairly easy to use, although they're running BMW's latest operating system 8, which I have found a little bit difficult to use. However, I do think I need to spend a little bit more time in it. Of course, you do get wireless Apple CarPlay and wired Android Auto, which is always lovely to see. Now, at the front here, we've got a standing wireless phone charger, which is a little bit interesting. I don't really know if I want to see the phone flashing in my face all the time, but obviously that seems to be what some customers do want. And we've got this floating centerpiece display down here. We've got a little bit of storage room at the bottom and some dual USB-C ports over here. Now, you've probably also noticed that there is no iDrive controller anywhere to be found. I personally find that a little bit disappointing. However, a lot of people do prefer those touchscreen controls, so I'll leave that up to you down in the comments to let me know if you think that's a good or a bad thing. Now, another thing that you'll probably notice that's different about this interior is this steering wheel. And no, I'm not going to have a fat whinge about the fact that it's a bit thick. That's not what we're going to talk about today. That's just how BMW is, it seems. However, what I am going to talk about are these buttons. They've really simplified the design here, and I'm not sure if it's in a good way. Some of the buttons move a little bit too much, and while a lot of them are tactile in feel, they're not necessarily all that great to use, and I found myself a little bit hunting around for them, which is a little bit disappointing. One interesting thing about the M Sport is you do get this boost button, which essentially changes the way that this car really attacks the last 30 kilowatts of the 230 kilowatt power output of this car to be a little bit more exciting. Now, for those wondering who are going to go for the X-Line, you still do get a maximum of 230 kilowatts of power. However, it just acts a little bit differently when you tap the boost button in this M Sport. In terms of interior upholstery options, well, every iX1 is fitted with perforated synthetic leather seats, and there are 3 options for both the X line and the M Sport, but there is one that's reserved for the M Sport, which essentially offers a combination of that perforated leather and some Alcantara. So that's there, and it's great to see a wide variety of interior upholstery options. I personally really like this white synthetic leather here. So as a part of BMW's pricing adjustment on the iX1, they took some of the features that were previously standard and they put them into their $4,700 enhancement pack. And some of the things you might want in that includes the Harman Kardon stereo. And I haven't been able to listen to the stock stereo today. However, I can say the Harman Kardon is quite nice to listen to. Another thing which is packaged in there is the panoramic sunroof, which is really lovely and adds to the overall great visibility inside this cabin. No matter how you spec your iX1, it's going to be fitted with this seat design. However, when you go for the enhancement pack, you get electronic lumbar and you also get a massaging function, which is really lovely, and BMW's tied it in quite nicely with some driving modes which you can cycle through. You also get metallic paint thrown in, which is a $1,500 option if you don't go for the enhancement pack. So as I said before, the iX1 is a pretty sizable vehicle in terms of dimensions, kind of similar to a mid-size SUV. However, it doesn't offer the level of comfort that other mid-size SUVs do. And part of that is due to the high floor. As you can see, my legs are up pretty high. I'm 6 foot tall. And unfortunately, that battery has just really bumped up the floor height, and I gotta say, would not be a place I'd want to spend a lot of time in here. How I definitely could get around in here for about an hour or two without much complaint. I think it's also notable that I have a little bit of knee room here, and there's enough distance between my driving position and the back of this seat that I reckon you could get a baby seat in here without too much fuss. In terms of visibility, well, we've actually got quite a bit of it here, just like we do in the front row, and especially with this lovely panoramic roof open like it is. And that's great if you've got kids who are suffering from a little bit of car sickness here or there. But what about amenities? Well, in terms of the basics, we've got our 2 rear air vents back here. We've got 2 USB-C charging points. We've got bottle holders in the door, and of course, little speakers back here as well. Now here is where I think the iX1 reveals its practicality party piece. Now, opening the power tailgate, which is always a nice touch here, we reveal a 490 litre boot, which is just 10 fewer than the iX large SUV offered by BMW. And once you fold that second row down, the boot becomes almost 1,500 litres, which is very nice indeed. As far as amenities back here, well, we've got a net on one side. Don't really have much in the way of tie-down points, unfortunately, and we've got a 12-volt back there, so you can have a mini fridge. However, it's a bit of a shame about those lack of tie-down points. I guess you'll just have to give your stuff to your passengers. Fortunately, there is also no spare wheel, just a bunch of charging cables and a bottle of goo if you get a puncture. So how much is it going to cost you to actually own and run this iX1? Because of course that's the big appeal of owning an EV like this. Well, BMW claims an official consumption of 18.3 kilowatt hours, and in our testing, a little bit of country driving, a little bit of athletic throttling about the place, and a little bit of city driving, we saw a consumption of 17.5 kilowatt hours, which of course is under the claim that BMW has given, which is great to see. However, we're going to need to see an official Chasing Cars range and efficiency test to find out what the real results are. But what about when the battery goes flat? Well, BMW has kindly packaged in a 3-year subscription to ChargeFox, so you can use their network when you're doing those road trips and other things when you're away from home. As far as actual speeds, well, on a DC charger, you're going to see speeds of up to 130 kilowatts, which isn't the fastest out there, but that will still see it topped up from about 10 to 80% in 29 minutes. What's more impressive, however, is the fact that if you've got a really serious AC charger at home, it can charge at speeds of up to 22 kilowatts, and that will see the battery recharge from flat to full in about 3 hours and 45 minutes. In terms of the warranty, now BMW has lengthened its warranty now to 5 years and unlimited kilometers, but that's just on the car itself. On the EV drivetrain components, it's up to 8 years in terms of time, but it's limited to 160,000 Ks, which is a bit of an average industry standard we're seeing develop. So BMW is offering the iX1 in a single grade, and it's also offering it in just one battery size. Now, that battery size is 64.7 kilowatt hours in usable size, which puts it about the middle of the road in terms of larger battery sizes. And BMW Australia quotes that it will do about 400 kilometers of range. And as I've said before, we're going to have to do an official Chasing Cars charging and range test to make sure that's all squared up and find out what it really gets. Now, the question on if 400 kilometers of range is enough will definitely be down to you, but I certainly think in the sort of role that the iX1 is probably going to play is in that of a secondary vehicle. It would certainly go nicely with a diesel X5 for certain. And I think in combination with its pretty good, but definitely not class-leading charging speeds of 130 kilowatts, it makes up for a pretty good matchup, I think. And BMW has definitely put the emphasis on home charging, which is how I think most people are going to charge up their iX1. Now, what about power? Well, when driving this car, I found that it's 230 kilowatts of power and 494 newton meters of torque are actually quite significant. Some rivals out there have a little bit more, but honestly, I don't think it would be super necessary. It feels beyond its numbers in some ways, and even if it's not, I think we need to remember that 500 newton meters in a small SUV is quite a lot of grunt, and it's certainly enough to get this around, and it does give you a real advantage perhaps over the X1. Now, I haven't driven the combustion X1 personally, but I've seen the sort of acceleration numbers that it produces, and this gets from 0 to 100 in 5.6 seconds, which is about 2 seconds quicker than the xDrive X1, which is a pretty significant jump in terms of acceleration. Now, what about punting this thing around town? Well, sadly, I haven't spent much time today in city areas, but I have spent a bit of time out on country roads, and I can tell you that there is definitely some work to be done on the suspension. This is unfortunately the biggest weakness of the iX1, and I really hope we do see some improvement here. Now, the iX1 is a pretty heavy vehicle. It's about 2 tons in weight, and that is a lot for a small SUV, even one that sits on the spectrum of more of a mid-size SUV, how it is now. And unfortunately, it just really seems to struggle with the added weight that it has on. There were some times today where there were some bumps that were moderate in size that did crash through the cabin more than I would expect from a vehicle at this price point, and that's really disappointing. And that's despite the fact that we have adaptive dampers fitted as standard. Those problems unfortunately also do extend to the body control. There were some instances where I threw it around some corners on a fairly high-speed country road, and when I went around one corner, it simply wasn't able to stabilize the car properly before I reached the next. And that doesn't give you a very secure feeling as a driver, which is a bit unfortunate. And unfortunately, that combination of some crashiness through the suspension over those bumps and a general feeling of it not being in full control isn't really great as a driver. Now, the steering, however, is another matter. BMW has fitted its M Sport steering on the iX1 as standard across both the M Sport and the X-Line trim levels, and that's great. I'm able to get a good amount of feel on here, and it feels nice and direct, and I was able to get quite a bit of communication, which is really nice to get that added feedback along with this visibility so you actually know what's going on the road ahead. Now, what about in terms of safety? Well, as it stands right now, the iX1 doesn't actually have an official safety rating from ANCAP or NCAP. However, the X1, the combustion version, does have a 5-star rating under ANCAP. And we're hoping to see that filter through to the iX1 at some stage, but given its close relation to the combustion version, I think it's pretty safe to assume that this is a quite safe car. Now, in terms of airbags, we do have some modern innovations. There's 7 in total, but there is a front center airbag, which is great for those side-on collisions. That's something we're starting to see filter through now on cars a lot more often, and that's great to see considering how many of these cars are going to be driven around with 2 people up the front. Now, I've been able to do a little bit of testing of the adaptive cruise control today. The lane keep assist has been quite good, and also the distance managing with the cars in front I think has also been quite appropriate. However, I look forward to testing it a little bit more in those city areas. In general though, it's been a bit of a mixed experience in the iX1, and unfortunately we're just not seeing that athletic performance from this car that I would have hoped to see from a BMW, which does focus a bit more on the driving experience, or perhaps a lighter weight front or rear drive version of this car that we might see some improvements with that. But for now, that's just how it is, and we're gonna have to accept some of the downsides with the good sides. Now, I want to talk a little bit about novated leasing because, of course, the iX1 is one of a few EVs out there which does qualify for the government's waiver on the fringe benefits tax. Now, even though BMW has put up the price, the luxury car tax has also been bumped up another $5,000. And with the way the specs are laid at the moment, you'll be happy to know that you can get this car as is, or you can also get some bigger wheels, or instead you can go for some metallic paint. Unfortunately, what you can't do is go for that $4,700 enhancement pack, which unfortunately just tips it over into luxury car tax territory and thus disqualifies it for that fringe benefits tax waiver, which is a bit of a shame, I think, considering there's just really about $1,000 between that, and I really wish that BMW had just kept the price of that package just a little bit lower. Now, today we set out to answer the question on whether this is a good electric vehicle for a broad range of people, which is obviously what BMW is trying to target here. Now, of course, it's not perfect. That ride really does need some work, and of course, some of those interior plastics are a little bit cheaper than its $85,000 price tag might suggest. However, overall, I think this is a pretty good accomplished vehicle. It's got the practicality that means those with young families could definitely see themselves in this car without too much compromise in terms of space and carrying stuff around. And I also think it's pretty quick, it's pretty fun, and I think it looks pretty good too. The real question for me is whether you would go for this over something like a Hyundai Ioniq 5 or a Kia EV6 or even a Tesla Model Y, because for this sort of money, you can get a pretty nice trim of any of those. You could also go for the Volvo XC40 dual motor, which is just a touch cheaper than this one. However, I definitely think the iX1 has something unique to offer here. But today has of course just been our first drive of the iX1, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of our upcoming range and charging test at Chasing Cars to see how far this thing can really go and by using how much energy. Those have been my thoughts today, but what do you reckon about the iX1? Do you think it packages in enough for the money? Could you see yourself climbing into one of these in the near future? Let me know in the comments down below. But for now, that's all. Thanks for watching Chasing Cars.